Hello and happy, beautiful day to you. On today's episode, we are going to geek out a bit in a beautiful way and talk about mind-body healing and the connection and how it all works. And I just love where we're going. You know, the reason that I have been able to even heal myself or show others how to get results and even show and demonstrate healing with the mind under medical equipment is because the way that I understand the mind, because I see it in a different way and I was able to look at the details, and that was pivotal. And the reason we're going to go there is, of course, because last week's IQ episode. So last week, if you recall, we talked about people getting stuck in misconceptions, in mistruths or misinformation, and it keeping them from healing. And what I love is that so many people reached out with aha moments last week. Just huge awareness about energy, about the mind, about how it works. And then also there were a lot of people that reached out with questions and asking more questions about the placebo and energy and how it works and all of that fun stuff. And I love that. I love that because, again, by understanding it, that's how I've been able to get results. And that's true with anything. I mean, even if we think about a computer, you know, the more you understand how to use it, the easier it is to get the results that you want. And of course, if we don't understand how to use the computer, we're hitting buttons and it could feel frustrating. And so that understanding has just been pivotal for me. And so that's where we're going to go today, is just kind of geek out on some of this information and just unpack some of these questions. So we're going to be a little bit all over the place because there were a variety of different questions that came in. So we're going to talk about the open label placebo. We'll talk about the energy of the body. We'll talk about commanding the body to do certain things or whatnot. So that's where we're going to go. Now, starting with the energy of the body. Let me unpack that a little bit more, because last week, as I was talking about the energy of the body, I would refer to it as bio-photons, but we could call the energy of the body the aura, or we could call it just spiritual energy or life force energy. This energy of the body has a lot of different names to it. I mean, technically, when it was medically discovered 100 years ago, it was called mitogenetic radiation. It also has the name of UPE, which is ultra weak photon emissions, or biophotons. So whatever you want to call it, it's absolutely incredible. So, you know, a lot of times people might think that energy of the body is just woo-woo, you know, that it's a spiritual notion. And yes, absolutely, there's a spiritual notion. If you think about even in biblical times, angels are painted or depicted with halos around their heads. So the energy of the body. So absolutely. But it's also been medically discovered that we do emit light energy from the body. And now a simple way to think about it is like this, is if you think about a light bulb, it emits photons, so little particles of light, or the sun emits particles of light, so photons. So the body emits photons also, which are referred to as now mostly biophotons. And so again, it has a few different names. We can simply call it light energy. Now, last week we had started talking about this light energy that a lot of times you hear people say, well, to heal, just raise your energy. Just lift your energy. But we want to be careful about saying that. I mean, if you think about it like this, easiest way to think about it is we think about the heartbeat. Okay, we don't want to say just raise your heartbeat. Eek. Okay, we don't want no heartbeat. So you don't want to have no heartbeat, and also you don't want to have huge, really, really high frequency heartbeat. You want to have a nice, healthy level. Or even if it comes to brain waves, you know, you don't want to have no brain waves, but you don't want to have them always in high frequency either. That's not good for you. And so similarly, all of the time people will say, well, just raise your energy, raise your energy. But as we talked about last week, technically speaking, cancer cells emit higher frequencies. So you've probably heard before people say, just raise your frequency. And it's like, well, wait a second here. That's not what the data says. The data says that higher and higher frequencies, again, emit from cancer cells. And so we want healthy frequency. And this is what's incredible about this light energy. So let's unpack this a bit more, because it is absolutely amazing. So let's look at that for a moment. Now, again, having healthy biophoton emissions, very, very important. So healthy energy, very, very important. One way to think about it is, again, it was like a plant, if you will. If a plant has too much sun, what happens? It's not good for it. If it has no sun, that of course isn't good for it either. So similarly, our bodies need this light energy. But imagine if we said, oh, I'm just going to give you a ton of light energy for your cells. Well, wait a second here. Okay. So that's a way to think about it. Now, what we were talking about last week, because we also talked about misconceptions, is telling your body, like for a lot of people, they say, just raise your energy to heal. You want to raise your energy and just lift your frequency. The reason that you'll want to be careful about telling your body that is because you don't want your body to start doing that. Because again, if we think about a heartbeat, it has a certain frequency. Your brain, it has a certain frequency. Your body, it has a frequency. So you don't want to just lift your frequency, because that's not going to be healthy for your body. Now, when it comes to telling your body what to do, sometimes it can actually listen. And that's where you want to be careful about just commanding. And for example, you may have heard me on past episode, I talked about somebody who had been trying to hypnotize themselves to get their body to create more and more insulin. So they had type 2 diabetes, and they were hypnotizing themselves to get the body to create more insulin and more insulin and more insulin. Well, ultimately what ended up happening is that as they were doing this and hypnotizing themselves to do this and going to hypnosis, their body did end up creating a bunch of insulin. And then they ended up in the hospital with low blood sugar because it wasn't regulated. And there were other issues too. But suddenly their body did create a bunch of insulin, and they ended up in the hospital with very, very, very low blood sugar. Now, great, wonderful that they came out, they made it okay, and then they decided, okay, they need to work with the mind in a different way to heal. And that's the key, is we don't want to command our bodies to do things, because we don't want that. We want our body to achieve homeostasis. We want our body to be able to be able to create the changes that it needs to create. And so if we command our body to say, just lift its frequency, we don't want to do that. Even if you look at medical research on biophotons, feelings of anger actually increase biophotons. Also, it's more complex than that. Looking at the topic of diabetes for a moment, with somebody with diabetes, a lot of times there's been studies that have shown that if you take somebody with type 2 diabetes and you compare them to somebody without, the energy of the body differs. So somebody with type 2 diabetes will have higher energy from their navel area than somebody without. And somebody without will have more energy from the forehead than somebody with. And so my point is when you stop and think about it for a moment, all of the time you hear people say, well, just lift your frequency. And it's like, wait a second, let's let the body balance the frequency that it needs to. Let's let the heart have the frequency that it needs to. Let's let the brain waves have the frequency that it needs to. And really what we want to do is change the emotions, because ultimately our minds are able to shift this energy. So there have been studies that show, for example, that even there's a database that for Cornell University that shows there is a direct correlation between our neural pathways and our neural activity and biophoton emissions. So there's a direct correlation between them. And also there have been studies where people visualize white light, and as they're picturing white light, there's increased biophoton emissions out of the right side of their head, but not the left. And if they just have mundane thoughts, it doesn't do that. My point is just very simply that our own thoughts and emotions direct energy of the body. And so that's ultimately what you want to think about, is simply that the more that we have positive thoughts, the more that we're able to release negative thoughts like anger or whatnot from our subconscious mind, the more that we shift our energy in a healthy way. So it's not just raise your frequency, raise your frequency, raise your frequency. It is instead understanding that the mind-body connection and that our own thoughts and emotions actually direct energy. Now, by the way, something that also is interesting is this, is that if you've heard before the phrase, raise your frequency, you might be surprised to know that meditation actually lowers the frequency of biophoton emissions. And so it's interesting when you stop and look at what is actually happening. So imagine if somebody's saying, I just need to raise my frequency, and then they're meditating to lower the frequency. Again, we don't want to command the body to do things. Instead, our emotions are so powerful. And so I know this, it gets a bit complex, but that's, if we just simplify it and we just really think about the power of emotions, that's really what we want to look at. When we think about the power of emotions, if we simplify everything, let's be honest. A person can, we know that emotions, for example, a person can die of a broken heart, or somebody can be scared to death, where they're so scared their heart stops. Or research shows and suggests that stress can actually cause autoimmune conditions. So when we think about these emotions, we know that they affect the body. Or even on a simple note, if somebody's embarrassed, their face turns red. My point is instead of commanding the body, when we really understand that our own thoughts and mindset and emotions are directing our energy, that's when we're in power. And so instead of just commanding our body to raise the frequency or lower the frequency or create more insulin or whatnot, we want to get the body to heal itself. So even if we go back to the topic of diabetes, even medical research has even shown that loneliness can increase chances of type 2 diabetes. So again, we can see that there's an emotional connection. Now, that's not true for everybody with type 2 diabetes, but what you'll find is that there are specific emotional components that are connected to every different illness. And so sometimes I've worked with people with type 2 diabetes who had plenty of people around them, and yet also sometimes they might have a tendency inside to kind of shut down from people, even if there are a bunch of people around. We've all heard the phrase before that a person may feel alone in a crowded room. And so my point is just really around the topic of not commanding the body, but instead really shifting our mindset and our emotions, because that in turn shifts our biophotons and our energy. And that's ultimately what we want to do. And by the way, if we think about emotions for a moment, not only does it shift our energy, but stress can be connected to hormones or even neurotransmitters. And so if we think about dopamine, if we think about oxytocin, so if we think about the biochemistry of the body, that can be affected. Also, stress has also been linked to free radicals and free radical damaged cells, ROS, reactive oxygen species, etc. So my point is that not only can emotions affect and shift the energy of the body, biophotons, but it can affect the body in multiple ways. And that's the point. And that's what is so healing, is when we really take these emotions and we shift them at a deeper level. That's when it becomes pivotal. So that is key. Now, I'm going to go on to one more topic, and it is the placebo and open label placebo. And by the way, we'll bring this all and simplify it. So if it feels a little complex, I'm trying to simplify it, and we'll simplify it even more. But if we look at the open label placebo and the placebo itself, We've all heard before of the placebo, a fake treatment, a fake pill that a person can take. And if they take that, they can have some type of results. Now, what was shocking to me during my injury is that, I thought it was all about belief. And I've seen people so often, they think it's just about belief, just about belief. And so I thought that the placebo was just about belief. Like I had to believe, so I was visualizing myself healed. I was picturing myself, 100% healthy. I was believing, I was doing affirmations and mantras and all of the things, and it wasn't working. Then I thought, well, what is it? What do I need to know? And I found something called the open label placebo, which is open label. It's exactly like it sounds. So both the doctor and the patient both see the label. They both know that it is 100% not a real treatment, and yet it can still work. So it's not just about belief. Now let me unpack this, because I mentioned this on last week's episode, but people said, well, how does it work then? And again, it goes back to emotions. Let me explain. So when we think about belief in healing, just saying, I believe it's going to work. I believe it's going to work. Let's be honest. You've probably, if you're here, you've been working on healing yourself, there's probably several things you believed would work. Supplements, diets, whatever it is. There's probably many things that you believed would work that didn't. Like me, there were a lot of things that I believed would work, but they didn't. And that's one form of belief. Okay? Now imagine for a moment a different form of belief. Imagine if somebody believes and feels very strongly that life is going to get better. What does that create? That creates an emotional shift, a sense of optimism. Now, by the way, that feeling of optimism, that has been shown to speed up healing. In fact, research shows that studies after surgery, if somebody is optimistic, they can actually heal a lot faster, like cellular proliferation. So their cells, they can heal faster. But after surgery, if somebody's fearful, stressed, anger, upset, all of that, it can actually slow down healing and also increase their chances of rehospitalization. So if you think about it, it's a different type of belief. So when I was trying to believe I was healed, that was one thing. But that's like believing something's going to work. That's one thing. But believing life is going to get better, believing life is safe, there's a belief. So imagine if somebody goes from fear to believing life is safe. That's an emotional shift. So again, my point is it really goes back to the emotion. So even if we look at the placebo for a moment, one of the things that has been very impactful in the placebo itself has to do with the doctor-patient relationship and that connection. So that can be one thing. Now, I would say we could go down the rabbit hole because there are a lot of things. I would say another thing that I've seen is this, is I've seen people who believed something that was going to work, like a feeling of novelty. For example, there has been a placebo regarding ayahuasca. And there was a study that was done in Brazil that about like the placebo was about 78% positive on the placebo, a fake treatment. And my point is from that is that there's a novelty about it. So let's say somebody does a placebo and then on something, and then afterwards they're connecting with people. They're talking about it. They're connecting and they're saying, hey, I did, so my point is that there are so many different emotions that can go on with the placebo. A belief that life is going to get better. A doctor-patient relationship, positive expectation. So that's what I would say. And again, we could make this very complex, but if I were to simplify it, if you think about the fact that the open label placebo works, where they both know it's a fake treatment, and it still works. We can see it's not just belief that the pill is going to work or the treatment's going to work. There is an emotional component, and that's what's key. So it really comes back to the power of emotions, and some of it can be so counterintuitive, and I won't get any more into the technical, but I'm trying to simplify everything. But that's the point, is when we really stop and look at it, it comes back to emotion. So even in my case, when I believed that I was going to heal and I believed it and believed the treatments, it didn't work. For me personally, I had survivor's guilt. So if you know my story, I also, from 9/11, I had a feeling of expecting to die, also wanting to die for people, and also a feeling of guilt for surviving. And it wasn't just 9/11. It was a pattern that was in my subconscious mind that showed up in a variety of different ways. So it would be, so my point is that it really ultimately takes creating that change at a deeper level with emotions. And so also on that note, as far as the open label placebo or even the placebo goes, most of the time the results from the placebo, they may help the symptoms, but they don't result in full healing. And which is, if you think about it, the same is true with emotions. People can have ups and downs, but when I see people really, really get lasting healing results is when they change their emotions all of the way at their core. So if you think about it, people have good days and bad days. And so we can see that there can be ups and downs. There can be emotional ups and downs or triggers. And so that's what is key, is really creating that emotional change at a deeper level. So that's where I want to bring it to, because again, I'm trying to simplify the technical, and I know that sometimes it can feel a bit complex, but if we were to summarize it and bring it all together, we would say, number one, we don't want to just command the body to do things, like command it to raise its frequency or lower the frequency or create more insulin or whatever it is. Instead, the more we really heal ourselves, heal our emotions, heal the emotions at the subconscious level, the more that we can create that change at a deeper level. Now, if we simplify this all to one specific thing, we could say this: the power of positive expectation is incredible. I mean, the awareness that even, again, we talked about, even after surgery, if somebody has that positive expectation and optimism, it can speed up healing. And of course, even if we think about optimism in general, I mean, research has shown that people who are the most optimistic can actually live 15% longer. Or emotional vitality. There's studies on emotional vitality, even from Harvard, or, a lot of different studies on how it affects the heart. And there's research that shows that if somebody's got emotional vitality, it can dramatically reduce their chances of coronary heart disease. So again, if we just simplify this all and bring it all together, we would simply say, your emotions are powerful, more than most people realize. But the problem is a lot of times people may decrease them some or work on resolving some issues, but there's still a patterned way of thinking and feeling and perceiving. And a simple way to think about that is, if you think about one person who, let's say somebody may have a tendency to feel sympathy or self-sympathy, whereas another person may have a tendency to feel angry, or another person may have a pattern of feeling self-critical. And so my point is that a lot of times, even when people go to shift these emotions that may be affecting their health, it's a patterned way of thinking. So it just comes up again and again and again. And that was mine, and that's what I see all of the time, is that to really get healing results, we have to go deeper to repattern the mind. But when we do, that's when it affects our energy, our health, and really allows the body to heal at a deeper level. So that's the insight that I want to give you, is exactly that, is boost the optimism, boost the positive expectation, and also notice any negative patterns that you may have running in your subconscious mind and genuinely change those. Now, I know that this may feel like a lot, and there is a training on my website, a free training, if you'd like to go through that. It has slides and all of that that can help you to see and bring it together even in a more cohesive way, if you will. But I'm just wanting ultimately today to answer the questions that came in from the last episode. So that said, those are the specific questions that were asked, is about the placebo, the open label placebo, energy of the body, and the frequency and all of that. So that's the insight from today. And again, if you need more information, if you want more to understand at a deeper level, come join me on the free training. And otherwise, bring this feeling in, the positive expectation, optimism, and genuinely look to change any negative patterns at a deeper level. All right. So that said, it has been such a pleasure connecting with you. And I want to ask you to please do make a point to hit the share button on this episode. Share it with somebody you love, somebody you care about, or somebody you don't even know. Because the more that every single person in our world feels happy and healthy and loved and loving and empowered, the better this world is for all of us. And so please do make a point to hit the share button. And please do have a most wonderful, incredible rest of your day.